Let's see. So our next speaker will be Justin Kringstad, the Executive Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. Justin will be speaking on oil and gas takeaway and a changing landscape. Now, every time I think I have things figured out, I always listen to Justin talk, and I understand how much I don't understand about the basin. So we're in for a real treat with Justin. Now, he also asked for a very short introduction, so I think most everybody knows Justin. Give him more time to talk. So I'm going to keep it brief, but help me welcome Justin to the stage.
Well, thank you, Brent. Appreciate the introduction. Sincere thank you to Ron and the Petroleum Council members for having me back again this year. This is always an exciting event. I love the conversations the audience that this event brings in. So we'll get right into the fundamentals of what we're working with here. Here we go. We'll get started with the drilling rig activity. This is where we need to start the discussion on the midstream side, understanding where production's at currently and where we expect it going in the coming years so that we can have a midstream infrastructure for the gas, the crude oil, the NGLs to match the pace of development that this basin is capable of. So as of last week, just shy of 40 drilling rigs active in North Dakota. Again, this is a level that we've been at now for quite some time. The one thing that makes today's drilling rig count and that rig fleet so important is we're in an environment that really started over the last several years of operators pulling down their duck well inventory. For a while, there was a time where the drilling rig count didn't matter as much to us in the forecasting world because there was such a fleet of drilled but uncompleted wells that the rig count was important, but there were so many wells that were capable of being stimulated, coming online. That is largely gone now, and so we're very, very reliant on that rig fleet that we were looking at here on this previous slide. The rig fleet that we have in North Dakota, it's settled in. What I want you to focus on that right-hand axis, how many rigs are active in North Dakota for relative to the WTI oil price. And you can see throughout kind of the Bakken development, we've got these different tiers of time when operators responded differently to oil prices based upon rig efficiencies and all of those things wrapped into it. But kind of in a post-COVID world, we've really settled in at right around this 0.5 metric. So if you take the WTI oil price, take it times 0.5, that's been a pretty steady number now for the last year or two of how the operators have reacted here in the basin. So when we look at rig efficiencies, so what are we doing with those 39 rigs? The green line is what I want you to focus in on this set of information. And that's on that right-hand axis as well. That's the efficiency of the drilling rig fleet. And so we are now up above that 2 wells per rig per month. That's a big threshold. Many years ago, you can see it was far less than 1 well per rig per month. And so we're doing far more with those 39 rigs today than any other time in history. So the magic question becomes then, what does this mean for production going forward, and how does that tie back into the pipeline network, and do we have adequate infrastructure to address it? So the production forecast model that I build and run, I've run it now for all those different cases where I said, okay, what is the magic number of well completions? It doesn't matter how many rigs, it matters how many new wells are being stimulated each month and coming online. That's what's going to drive production. So you can see the various cases there, and it's not until you start getting up into that 80, 90 well completions per month that you see oil production in North Dakota staying steady to starting to grow. I've also thrown on this chart, or on this slide, the information from the DMR about how many wells were completed. So if you look at 2024 numbers, the official data that we have now through June, oil production's been on a slight slide. You look at the number of wells that were being completed in each one of those months, and it's not a surprise. We do need more wells than what was happening in the first half of this year, which I'm optimistic and confident that the second half of this year is going to look much different than the first half. But that is probably the number one reason that I point to when people say, why have we seen sliding oil production in North Dakota for the first half of 2024? It's just simply not enough wells coming online for a number of reasons, winter, spring issues, and now really things starting to get rolling in that likely August, September time frame. So if we need 80 plus well completions per month, the other metric we need to look at is frac crews. So I started digging through Lynn's old data, Mark and the DMR team and what they have out. In blue on the left-hand side, that's the frac crew count that comes from DMR each month. It's something that they track with their field staff. I took that back and looked at well completions, and on the right-hand side, took a look at efficiencies. So the good news is that our completion crews in North Dakota are getting more efficient, over 5 wells per crew per month. And so with the latest number of 13 crews, and you've got how many wells, you can start running some math and saying, okay, is that going to be at a level that's going to get us back into the maintenance mode or the growth mode? And you see that red line there. 13 frac crews, I think, is adequate to keep us in kind of that maintain mode. Once we start seeing frac crew numbers or increasing efficiencies or technology advancements, 14 plus crews, if we start seeing those numbers coming, that's a real positive sign that I think production will be back on that upward momentum. So where things come together then, taking a look at what the EIA is forecasting for oil price, how that wraps back into North Dakota's activity levels, productivity from the wells. I have my base case in gray going forward for oil production in the state, and then in red is my low case, which takes a bit of a haircut off of that EIA oil price. When we look at the crude oil dynamics, we're still in a really good spot right now as far as moving North Dakota crude oil out of the basin. For much of the early portion of the play, that was not the case, and you're all familiar with what that was doing with discounts and the volatility in the marketplace. Going forward, I'll touch later on some NGL dynamics, but we're going to lose one of our crude oil outlet options here mid-next year as it converts over to NGL service, which I think is going to be a solid move. But at least for the foreseeable future, things may get tighter on the crude oil takeaway, assuming we can keep all these systems in service. There's no major maintenance issues. Things look very, very positive for the basin on a crude oil perspective. And then last thing I'll talk about on crude oil is the pricing dynamics. We saw some things happening up in Canada related to the TMX pipeline being delayed, causing some market discounts, which trickled back into the U.S., the Clearbrook markets, and we've seen some pretty soft pricing for North Dakota oil relative to what we were used to over the last couple of years. Some early signals suggest that maybe August, September, we might start to see this improve slightly, but this is one thing that, again, we were in really good shape for probably the last 12 to 18 months prior to this, the TMX situation, and hopefully things rebound and start to normalize again. So what I really want to focus a lot of my time on today is on the natural gas dynamics. I was at a big natural gas event the last couple of days in Bismarck with a lot of folks, and the discussion was incredibly encouraging. I'll try to touch on what I can, what's out there publicly, but I'm more optimistic standing here today, probably even than I was a week ago, and certainly more than I was 3 or 4 months ago, that the natural gas solutions are coming. There's a lot of smart folks working on this and trying to get this addressed, so it's exciting times. That similar graphic that I put up earlier on crude oil looks very different when we talk about natural gas. So natural gas, when we talk about gas-oil ratios and what's happening downhole, we are able to see maintenance and even growth in our natural gas production in the state at levels, activity levels and completion levels much lower than on the crude oil side. So these gas challenges, even though it may look different as far as the completions basis, they're front and center. They need to be addressed regardless of what's happening. And the basis for that comes back to that gas-oil ratio. That's something we've talked about now for many, many years. I think we did our first formal study on it 10 plus years ago on gas-oil ratios in the Bakken, and it's something that continues to keep pace with expectations that we should plan for at least these wells to continue to get gas here over time. As the wells are drawn down faster, that production coming to surface at faster rates than ever, drawing down the pressure faster, which allows that gas-oil ratio influence to be noticed and becomes more meaningful much quicker. The other thing that we have to look at when we're building up our natural gas outlook is how the vintage wells are performing. The top portion of this graphic is oil production by year drilled in the Bakken, and the bottom half is the natural gas dynamics by year here in the Bakken. What's interesting about this bottom half is that we don't see that traditional kind of shale play decline that we do on the crude oil side. We do not see that on the natural gas side, and we're continuing to see, when I filter out wells that are 2017 and older, crude oil in green at the top looks very classic, continuing that nice decline curve that we would expect. Natural gas actually slightly increased over that time window that we're looking at here. So it's a dynamic that, again, most of us were not planning for in our early forecasting. It's something that we still struggle with how to manage that in these models going forward. I won't dive into this. The wells keep getting better. I'm going to get these slides on my website so you guys can dig into a lot of this data. But where the rubber meets the road, you saw my crude oil production forecast earlier, which is at the top. The way bottom is my natural gas production outlook, which is far more aggressive based upon what's happening on those gas-oil ratios, which you see in the middle. That trend on the GORs is expected. It's going to be choppy. There's going to be ups and downs, but that upward trend is one of the most solid bets you can have in the Bakken. You look at the oil curve at the top. You look at the GOR. You can't see any outside influence. The reservoir doesn't care what's happening at the surface. It knows what it wants to do with its GOR, and it's going to continue moving in that direction. So the first thing we need to take a look at, once we kind of have our arms wrapped around the production side, is do we have enough gathering and processing? That's the first phase in coming up with this natural gas solution. We sit in a very, very good spot today because of some substantial investments that companies were making, particularly right before COVID hit, expanding our gas gathering and processing infrastructure in the state. And so that's allowed us to be at those 5% flaring numbers, exceeding the DMR targets. The challenge and the question becomes, you look at this graphic and you say, okay, if these forecasts were relatively correct, that suggests that we need more gas processing. So everything you see in light brown, that's existing plants that we have in the service today. Hess has their public announcement with that one expansion coming here in 2026, and then a lot of white space. And so again, those discussions that were taking place over the last couple of days with folks taking a look at what's the scope and scale of some solutions for this. Again, very encouraged that folks are looking at this, and the right folks are looking at this at the right time. When we start breaking down our gas processing fleet here in North Dakota, this is a plant-by-plant breakdown with the latest data that we have. And you can see on the right-hand side that map of western North Dakota. A lot of excess capacity in some areas, and some areas that are less so when you look at just a plant capacity. The real positive, encouraging piece of this is the interconnectivity that's been developed over the last number of years. So counties connected to other counties. Places in Montreal now connected to gas processing on the western edge of North Dakota. That Montreal County area also having connectivity and expansion options towards the Alliance pipeline for raw gas. So that interconnectivity, as we see this continue to move forward, is going to be key because we cannot always predict where those rigs are going to be coming and where the needs are going to be at any given time. So the more that we have these plants interconnected with each other, the plants that have open capacity may be able to offload some of that gas from those facilities and those systems that are more constrained. On the gas processing, the question that comes when you're having those detailed discussions is how much more gas processing do we need in North Dakota? And this is something we've had a lot of fun conversations and debate back and forth of what's a good metric to go with when we say how much new gas processing do we need. The bottom portion of this graphic is really what I want you to focus on. It suggests that likely we'll be in a good spot for the next year plus, and once we start getting towards that 2026, towards that 2027 time frame, once we see that shift over into the positive territory, we're likely in a scenario where we're going to need some additional gas processing. And using this metric, which again is just one way of looking at it, potentially 1.5, 2 BCF of additional gas processing, which would need to be invested here in the Bakken as we looked forward of how to manage this growing gas production. And then lastly on this piece, the transmission. This is where most of my focus has been the last several years, is trying to understand how do we get these long lead infrastructure pieces in place in an appropriate time. So our current natural gas infrastructure as we see it today, these are the major residue gas. If you hear me use the term residue, I apologize. That's dry gas, residue gas. You'll hear me use it interchangeably. And you can see in the little black icons all of the gas processing plants connected to this infrastructure. The first system that we need to take a peek at is the northern border system. This is what North Dakota is incredibly reliant on. This is the largest pipeline that operates in North Dakota or through North Dakota. Originates up in Canada. It was built originally as a Canadian pipeline system that happened to come through the producing area of North Dakota. Over the years, the dynamics on that system have changed substantially. So we're now, where it used to be almost exclusively Canadian production moving on that pipeline system, what you see in gray, the market share has completely flipped now to 80 to upwards of 90% of the gas moving on northern border is North Dakota Bakken gas. And so that Canadian flow has gone down to, I don't want to say a trickle, but substantially smaller piece of the overall system flow on that system. The one key component when we look at northern border is you saw the trends where North Dakota continues to take more and more market share on the northern border pipeline. The question becomes, at what point can we no longer continue to expect gas to get onto that system? So I went through, again, all the contracts of people that have space on northern border. The green piece of this is what I want you to focus on. That's the Canadian producer component. So there's about 270 million cubic feet of gas per day that is held by Canadian producers up in Canada. That's going to be the most difficult piece of that system flow to shake off of there. It's going to take likely some intense competition to get that rerouted to other Canadian options, if ever. Again, that northern border system, the Ventura, Iowa, is a good market. That's going to be one of those pieces that we'll discuss in a moment of what that looks like. So I looked at it in two different directions. This is, again, a classic slide of mine. The top hand, the upper portion of this, is that assumption that those Canadian molecules from those Canadian producing companies will be sticky, that we cannot shake those. The other bookend at the bottom is that if we were able to take 100% of the northern border market share, what does that look like going forward? And then I've stacked on that the Bakken Express project, which is the one formally announced project that is moving forward to provide us some additional egress down to the Cheyenne market. So you see my base case in red, my low case in teal, and anytime you see any one of those lines pop above that zero line, we would theoretically be short on natural gas transmission capacity. So in my base case outlook, assuming all those Canadian molecules stayed sticky, things get extremely tight, roughly in that late 25, right before the Bakken Express comes on in that first half of 2026. In order to address that, the bottom portion suggests that if we were able to take 100% market share on northern border, that we could get by until the Bakken Express comes into service. And then the question becomes in 2026, 2027, and beyond, what are those options going forward? With the lead time that it takes to build out any of this infrastructure, the 2025, 2026 time frame there is done. The market will get tight, the market will compete. I think the market can take as much space on northern border as necessary. It might get ugly as far as pricing and what that competition is going to look like, but I think it is possible. So then our question becomes, beyond 2026, what are our options in order to keep this thing rolling forward? And so I tried to get cute here a little bit with my 5 C's, with the traditional discussion of construction. Is there new pipe that needs to be built? Can we continue to compete on other pipeline systems in the region, whether that's Alliance, whether that's the Viking pipeline system? Are there options there to move some gas those directions? And then consumption. This is the one that I really want to focus on, and I know we've got a panel coming up after us that's going to focus on this as well. A year ago, I did not think that this was going to be a major component of our overall solution, just given the scale, knowing that we needed 1.5 or 2 BCF a day of solutions in the basin. Consumption was one that I did not think was going to be a valid competitor to address this. My tune has changed substantially, given a lot of the things that we'll talk about here in a moment. So in order to get a new gas pipeline solution, for years we were always focused on this supply push. The Bakken was a big producer. We had to find some place to push those molecules. Again, the demand pull that's evolved over the last 6 months or so has been phenomenal. There's a number of these projects that have been in the works for a long time, but things now starting to go public. These are just some news stories I grabbed of some of those major overarching themes of who those companies are that are talking with key leaders here in North Dakota. On the left-hand side, that was a story that came out not too long ago based upon a lot of the comments that were made during the PSC hearing on data centers and other work that journalist had been working on to understand and confirm that there were some major players looking at North Dakota for AI data centers and what that could look like, and largely natural gas being the fuel source for those potential projects. And then you see the other 3 projects that have been formally announced. Those are moving forward as large gas consumers. You'll hear from Cyrillon here in a little bit. So we look at North Dakota. This is a map of the U.S. If you're a green state in here, you're a net exporter of natural gas. If you are a red state, you are a net importer. There's nothing in state law or state constitution that says we need to stay a green state here, that we can't flip-flop into a scenario where, is it theoretically possible that North Dakota could attract enough industry, whether it's in the data centers, power generation, where we could potentially address our own needs and change the conversation? Based upon the very real conversations that we've had with some of these large industrial users coming in, the question's been posed to me and others to say, what's the upper limit? We know what the Bakken needs just to survive on a gas egress solution. What's there if we want to go even bigger? And so this is my attempt. On the right-hand side, I said, okay, the lowest hanging fruit is northern border. We've got our own production growth. If we can continue to flow more molecules down the northern border pipeline into North Dakota to feed a new industrial use here in the state, the numbers start to get pretty staggering. That base case, we probably have easily another 2-3+ BCF of gas that could be in the region for local demand as these industrial users come to the area. The other question is, okay, even bigger than that, what if we need more than 2-3 BCF if some of these actually came to fruition? There's other possibilities with reworking some of the existing pipe in the ground, and so the sky is really the limit right now with these discussions that we're having with folks. The one piece that I think is going to be critical to this is natural gas storage. As we look at gas demand in the state and relying on that demand to be a 24/7 source for North Dakota's oil and gas industry to rely on, I think natural gas storage is one piece that we can't take our eye off of. And down in that left-hand corner, you'll see WBI, very quietly, I've said this a number of times, they operate North America's single largest natural gas storage field. And that is a massive asset for us here in North Dakota. And as we go forward, there were some public discussions that WBI was willing to share at their meeting this week. They are looking to expand that to provide additional both storage and then capacity in and out of that storage to support some of the demand opportunities that may be coming to the state. So exciting times for that. So with that, hopefully this was just a good taste. Please grab me here or give me a call. I'll get these slides online. I'd love to hear from you and hear what your thoughts on for addressing these issues. So thank you so much.